Hey ho, let's go. The Ramones. That's the center of our show today. And we're going to be talking about a new book out. I Want You Around, The Ramones and the Making of Rock and Roll High School by author Stephen B. Armstrong. And we have a special guest, Monte A. Melnick. Let me just say that in my career, I was fortunate to design albums for the Ramones, Road to Ruin, with the famous artwork of John Holmstrom, and End of the Century with the Mick Rock famous front cover photograph. And I also designed a single for Rock and Roll High School, which a lot of people don't know. So anyway, I'll introduce these wonderful gentlemen of the Ramones family. Stephen B. Armstrong, a film historian and author of several books, and he is also a professor of English. He teaches in the creative writing emphasis at Utah Tech University. And our other guest, Monte A. Melnick, was the tour manager for the Ramones and the famous author of his book, On the Road with the Ramones, which I am honored to be mentioned in also, by the way. Stephen, what was the impetus to do the book, first of all?
The love of the movie preceded the book, of course. And I saw Rock and Roll High School on MTV. I guess it was 1984, and it changed me from being sort of a square type athlete, scholar athlete, that sort of thing, and going in the direction of punk. So what had happened is that I had a long interest in the movie director and actor Paul Bartel, who plays Mr. McGree in Rock and Roll High School. And I had done a book on Paul. And through that, I got to know Alan Arkish. He and Paul Bartel were good friends, and also Joe Dante, who worked on Rock and Roll High School as a second unit director, and also was one of the people who came up with the story for the film. And I have done quite a bit of work with New World Pictures, this independent film production company owned by Roger Corman that released not only Rock and Roll High School, but also Ron Howard's first film, Grand Theft Auto, a Jonathan Demme early film, Caged Heat. And I had been became the general editor for an ongoing book series called Roger Corman's New World Pictures, 1970 to 1983 in Oral History. I'd done 2 volumes of that. And again, talking to many people who worked on Rock and Roll High School. And an agent came across these 2 books, the 2 first volumes of the Roger Corman Oral History, the New World Pictures Oral History, and said, "Why don't you work up an idea for a book, and I'll try to sell it. I'll try to sell your proposal." And so I thought, well, what's the movie that matters most to me? And it's Rock and Roll High School. And so I worked up a proposal fairly quickly, drawing from some of the material that appeared in the Paul Bartel book, and got a fairly quick offer and got to work. I spent 18 months on the book, 6 months research, 6 months writing, and 6 months mopping it up. And one of the people I should note I interviewed for the project was Monte. I was like, oh, this is so exciting, Monte A. Melnick. And I had read the cover to cover. I'd read the On the Road book with the Ramones, just for general interest. And I set up an interview, and I missed it. Remember that, Monte? Yep. And I got a scolding, and I learned never, ever miss a meeting with Monte A. Melnick. And
you got to be tight on the crew here.
Yeah, and go with the name Monte A. Melnick. It's not just Monte Melnick. And so in many ways, the book could not have gotten off the ground if Monte hadn't given me that early interview. And some of the material from we had 2 conversations, actually. Some of that material wound up in the Rock and Roll High School book, and some of it is going to be in the forthcoming 3rd volume of the Roger Corman Oral History series.
When I thought about the show, I said, Monte has to be on with Stephen. Monte's all over the place in the book. There's things that are, Stephen mentions about you, and he comes out of your book, that are interesting that people may not know about. Like there's a tie-in with the Bay City Rollers and the Ramones. And I actually designed an album for them called Ricochet for the Bay City Rollers. Monte, tell us about that association that was put with them.
First of all, I'm in the book, but I'm also honored to be on the cover. If you look right behind Beatty, I'm on the cover of the book, so I'm right behind Dee Dee there. Picture me on there. Yeah, see right behind Dee Dee over there.
Right.
There's
So
Herb Braha, who played the manager for the Ramones, and there's the actual a road manager right there, a tour manager right there.
Yeah, that's my scene in the movie where I kind of play the promoter, where I open the door for the pink Cadillac that Rodney Bingenheimer's driving, and they get out. They're singing I Just Want to Have Something to Do, coming up to this theater, and they get out of the car. I open the door, I get a nice big shot of me walking across the screen, and then I walk behind them for the whole song there. So I was happy to be in the movie there for that particular part. But getting back to Bay City Rollers, so they have a chant song, that the Ramones wanted to write. They like pop rock and stuff like that. They listen to a lot of different music over the years, and they just wanted to write type of a chant song like the Bay City Rollers had, SATUR, DAY Night, DAY Night, that type of chant. So they decided to write Hey Ho, Blitzkrieg Bop and Hey Ho, Let's Go as a chant, But they like the Bay City Rollers.
Stephen, coming back to you, you have actually in the book, you actually described the making of the album cover that I worked on with John, Road to Ruin, step by step from Gus McDonald on. Talk a little bit about this. Very interesting. You did the step-by-step process almost.
Yeah, and I do wish John were here for this because he tells the story. What is it? It must be in the Best of Punk book. I just can't recall right now, but John had been given a fan drawing of the Ramones, sort of gritty New York, a cartoon. And it plays into the idea that they're kind of a cartoon band, and the fan had given them the drawing, and there was things like a snake coming out of one amp and a claw coming out of another, and on the drums it was Tommy rather than Marky. And it was Marky who went into the studio with the guys as the new drummer to do the Road to Ruin recordings. And so John had to turn the drummer from Tommy into Marky, and took away some of these sort of surreal horror effects and worked up the city more. It was that period of New York, of course, when the city was sort of stumbling, and John, as I gather, was trying to make the city look a bit threatening, a bit scary, and also the whole concept of Road to Ruin. The ruin is right behind them, and so he worked on that, and then it was Johnny asked him to do it. Wasn't that the case, Monte?
Yeah.
It came to Spencer, so it was the fan drawing to Holmstrom, the professional illustrator, and then to Spencer to bundle it together and to use that eye-catching not clashing, but contrasting black and yellow arrangement. And I think it's the most catchy, eye-grabbing of all the Ramones covers.
Oh, really? Yeah. Thank you. I used that yellow. I thought yellow was really strong, so I put that against the black, right? And that really boom. But I want to add to that also. When I went to Sire Records to see the artwork that John put together, he had a whole bunch of overlays of different things that make up the artwork. It was unbelievable. It was like a bunch of overlays of plastic things going on. I said, okay, print it. You know what I mean? It was like, it's a great album cover. And I think the first printing, it's in silver, is added to the 4-color. Yeah. So that's a collectible with the silver. But anyway, I was honored to work on that. And of course, you mentioned that. And you also mentioned about End of the Century, which has the song Rock and Roll High School on the album.
Right. A slightly different version. Ed Stasium was the person who put down the recording with the Ramones, the original version, which Joey had written. Joey wrote Rock and Roll High School. It's sort of like a Beach Boys car song, and then Dee Dee had done the I Want You Around, a love song to Vera. But when Spector finally got them for the End of the Century album, he wanted a new recording. And there's this story of Johnny having to spend hours and hours and hours playing the same chord over and over and over again until it drove him crazy. And eventually he would leave the session. And I want to say that his father died during that session as well.
Oh, wow.
The problem with that was Spector worked very slowly. And the Ramones worked fast. I mean, everything they did was fast. A photo session fast. If a photographer took too long, they just walked out. And they weren't used to all the other albums. They just recorded very fast. And Spector was just, he wasn't fast at all. And that's a true fact about that one chord.
Wow.
He played it over and over and over again until he, in his mind, something was right about it. And then he finally did. And John was getting fed up. He didn't like sticking around for anything very long. So there was a problem there. And his father did die, which was a problem at the end there too.
And if I could say, and this works off of an idea that Monte provided for the book, is that the Ramones were accustomed to being on the go quite often, a different town every night, and then a club, and you have that rock and roll energy. But when they were doing the shooting for Rock and Roll High School, they were confined. They were actually in a classroom at this school, Mount Carmel High School in Watts. And these guys, some of them were high school dropouts. Here they are spending all day long in a classroom and no phones to occupy them. They had to ask for a TV. And I think that really wore on the mental health of by what I gather, Dee Dee and Johnny.
Yeah, it's kind of like being in detention.
Yeah.
In the movie, that's what the tow guard talks about, detention all the time. But the thing about doing a film, which they didn't realize, and I didn't realize, basically you go in and you sit around for like hours and hours, and then they shoot for like 10 minutes. And then they set up another scene, which takes another 2 hours. And then you got to sit and, do nothing. At that time, we didn't have cell phones or anything. So, we were stuck in this classroom. It was like rough. They didn't like that at all. They got very antsy.
The Ramones weren't even there the first day, nor was the film's star, PJ Souls. It was Clint Howard and Vince Van Patten and Day Young do the rather notorious scene where Clint Howard is unsnapping brassiers from a blow-up doll and showing how to get to I guess that would be second base, right? To this goofy, the whole idea of Vince Van Patten being goofy, with his looks, and they're playing against that, and then a beautiful a woman like Day Young being this sort of naive science nerd, and so that was shot the first day there on up there Mulholland and Mulholland Drive, and then the next day they were in Los Feliz, and PJ and Day were filming upstairs in this residential home. And that's when the Ramones did the sensational sort of music video within the movie for the title track, "I Want You Around."
Right.
Really good stories about that. But PJ, who winds up in a lingerie in that scene, and also in a shower, walking into a shower with a towel around her, she was doing that with the Ramones, whom she had just met a few hours earlier. Yeah, this crazy scene with Joey kind of climbing on top of her and into her face. This is complete strangers, right? And you just show what a great actress she is because of the control. But apparently when Joey was singing "I Want You Around, I Want You Around," spit would spray into poor PJ's mouth. And
that's crazy. What about tell us about, I read that Roseanne Arquette was up for a part, but she didn't get it.
Yeah, there was some rivalry there, and Roger Corman ultimately thought that PJ was the better fit for the movie if she made her hair a little bit more blonde, and she got the part. And there was some going back and forth between them, that awkwardness of two people competing for a lead role and being in the same room together. And the question was, who's it going to be? Who's it going to go to? And of course, Roseanne Arquette wound up in her own movie with great pop stars. For PJ, it was the Ramones. For Roseanne Arquette, it's Madonna with "Desperately Seeking Susan."
Yeah,
well, the Ramones weren't the first pick for the movie. Actually, it was
really?
I think Todd Rundgren and Cheap Trick, and they both passed on it. And then Alan Arkish came up with he saw the Ramones and said, this is going to work, So, but they weren't the first choice for the movie.
That's interesting,
right, Stephen?
Yeah, it came about that there was a lawyer who had connections with Warner Brothers, and which had merged with Sire, And at that point, Alan Arkish and Mike Fennell, they were working with a screen title of Disco High. Roger Corman wanted to exploit the trend that had been started with Car Wash, and had seen its greatest success with Saturday Night Fever. He thought, well, I'll make a disco movie, and there were going to be gymnastics elements. The film was originally going to be called Girls Gym, and so the title, the working title, was Disco High. And so Alan and Mike go over to Burbank to the offices, and representatives, talent representatives, are showing these two young movie makers. Well, here is who we have. What about Devo? What about Van Halen? What about Ramones? And Alan knew Ramones. He loved Rocket to Russia. And then what happens is that Alan, on his own dime, flew to New York City to go to an uptown club called it's Uptown or Midtown. It's
Uptown. Yes, it was near the museum up there.
Yeah, and also near Sire offices around 74th. And so he goes into Hurrah, and Danny Fields meets him, and then there is the Ramones sometimes would do an acoustic rehearsal or an unplugged rehearsal before a show to make sure everything was right. And Alan got to sit in on that. Monty, you were there, right?
Yeah.
And then Alan goes out onto the floor. The couple of bands were there first, Klaus Nomi and the Mumps, and then a power pop band. And then finally the Ramones pop up, and it just blew him away. And he knew that was the band for the movie.
Wow. For
the movie Disco High. And so he afterwards, he sees them 2 nights at Hurrah, and then he comes back to California and goes into the office with Roger Corman and his producer Mike Fennell and Paul Almond, again, who was the attorney who had connections with Warner. And he said, look, the band for the movie is going to be the Ramones. And Roger thought, well, that must be an Italian-American disco act from New York City. And of course, they're anything but an Italian-American disco act. And then Alan had to do the second bit of work right there, because Roger was turned on to the idea that the Ramones would do the work for $25,000. Cheap Trick wanted $50,000. So Roger liked the cheaper band without any hearing of any of this music at all, thinking it's a disco band. And then Alan says, I've got to correct this. And he jumps on a couch and he starts doing that motion with the arms that Pete Townsend always did with his guitar. And he says something to the effect, you can't lead a revolution to disco. You need the Ramones. You need this kind of hard rock.
Yeah.
And Roger, the anti-establishmentarian, says, well, yeah, bring it on. And at that moment, the movie's name changed from Disco High to Rock and Roll High School.
Wow.
That was one of the problems in the early years when the Ramones first came out. They thought the Ramones were some sort of Spanish band or something, like Los Ramones or something. There's a story like Danny Fields. Lisa Robinson told him to go see them, and he said, I'm not seeing a cha-cha Spanish band, So that was a problem for them in the beginning. And everybody also thought they were brothers, too, because they all had the last name.
Wow.
But that thing with the thinking there was some other type of music, it was in the beginning of their act, the Ramones, that's what happened there,
Steven, tell us about, did Seymour Stein have any input in the film?
Indirectly, by making available access to Sire's collection of artists and some recordings. And an example of that would be that in 1977, Joey had gotten sick with sinuses. Some people link this to the explosion with the tea kettle that he was using as a humidifier. But anyway, 3 of the Ramones were in Los Angeles, staying at the Tropicana, and a duo, a power pop duo called the Paley Brothers.
Right.
Had you did the album cover for their one and only, and Seymour said, you know what? I've got 3 Ramones who are ready to get some work done. I've got these 2 Paleys who got session time with Earl Mankey, the Beach Boys engineer. Let's see what happens. And they started throwing songs around, and Come On, Let's Go came up, the McCoy's version of the Richie Havens song. Yeah. these two bands, the Paley Brothers and the Ramones, just sort of synchronized perfectly in a day, get out this perfect cut of this cover song.
Right.
And that is the song that winds up in the closing credits of the movie, Come On, Let's Go.
All right.
And also the another Paley Brothers song came in. And so you'll see that on the soundtrack and the songs that don't wind up on the album, that there are many sire acts that were presented to Alan Arkish and his team of editors, from which the soundtrack was created. It's a non-original soundtrack, except for those two songs that Dee Dee and Joey wrote for the movie.
Monte, give us are there any other stories that you know, because you were on every day with them, you know what I mean? So maybe you have a couple of stories you might add to this?
Talk about being paid a minimum amount. We had to go do shows in between. So to pay for the expenses. And the shows happened to be with Black Sabbath and one with Foreigner, believe it or not. So they sent us in between when they were filming other things. We would go out for a week and a half, do these shows with Black Sabbath and then one with Foreigner, and then come back just because we had to pay the bills. We weren't getting paid very much for the movie.
Right.
You know?
Wow. Interesting.
Black Sabbath shows was crazy though at that time. Their audiences didn't like the Ramones at all. Nobody understood the Ramones back then. You know?
Oh, yeah.
The kings of heavy metal versus the kings of punk.
Yeah, I think
how the
like
San Bernardino concert was. That took place while they were in the movie, and then they come back, and the movie is a fantasy about the Ramones. It's where all the kids love the Ramones, and so they would get this almost regal treatment in the fantasy world of the movie, and then go out and have this hard reality that people were really taken back by their sound and hated them so much they'd throw batteries and ice picks while they were playing.
And the Black Sabbath crowd.
Yeah.
Brutal at the beginning there.
It happens in music, It's like you hear these stories. I mean, I heard a story that Talking Heads were playing LA. I walked into Sire Records and John Gillespie, the art director, said they were throwing beer bottles at the Heads last night in LA. And I said, oh my God.
So casting was a mixture of testing people and recommendations from Roger Corman. So they had a little office that used for casting decisions, and PJ Souls was picked early. She had impressed Alan Arkish and Mike Fennell with her appearance in Halloween, which when at that point I think it was the most successful independently produced film. Vince Van Patten was a suggestion of Roger Corman's, and Day Young, the third lead, she came about right at the end, and was the Thanksgiving, where the Ramones had been were at the Tropicana and had their Thanksgiving dinner at someone's house, a millionaire's house, the owner of the Tropicana's house, and Alan and his people were in the valley somewhere having their Thanksgiving, and then the next day they had this last minute casting with Day Young, who plays Kate Rambo in the film, the nerdy friend, the nerdy sidekick, and on Monday they started shooting. As for Clint Howard, he was Ron Howard had directed Grand Theft Auto for Roger Corman, and he appeared in a movie called Eat My Dust. And Roger Corman just loved Ron Howard, and he really appreciated Rance Howard, Ron's father, and Clint Howard. And Clint Howard was in Grand Theft Auto. Got to know Alan, who was a second unit director on that, I think it was. And so when they needed the Eaglebauer part filled, Clint was called, and so those are the principles of the film right there. And of course, the Ramones were cast after that encounter at Hurrah. And when you see the students in the film and the gymnasts, those were all recruited by the producer, Mike Fennell. And as for Mary Warrenoff and Paul Bartel, the great supporting characters in the film, Paul was a dear friend of Alan Arkish and Joe Dante. He had made Death Race 2000 for New World Pictures. And there was a kind of a scheme back then for directors who, it was a non-union company, and they could get their SAG cards and therefore access to insurance if they appeared in the films. So you oftentimes see New World directors having on-screen roles in New World pictures. And in addition to that, Mary Warnoff, she had been one of the drivers in Death Race 2000. And she's an Andy Warhol, Lou Reed, a companion in the 60s and early 70s.
Oh, wow.
And she was, she's the striking person, and striking in the sense that visually striking and personality striking, not picket signs striking. And Mary Warnoff, she was originally going to play the Miss Togar character as a sort of our Miss Brooks, an Eve Arden kind of, sort of pleasant and dour, but at the same time still the shot caller in this crazy high school. But she saw all these punks running around through the hallways of the abandoned Catholic school, listening to Ramones music. They would blast the music through the hallways. Yeah. And once she heard that music, she said, "There's no other way to play the Miss Togar character than as this sort of outrageous kind of Nazi type." And, right. and of course, it's one of the most memorable turns of an actress, I think, in 70s movies. Everybody remembers Miss Togar when they see her.
Yeah. I really love Paul Bartel because I remember him. He did he was big in indie film, Stephen, and he was a wonderful actor. I mean, one of those guys, one of the people that casted in the movie, which I really loved, by the way. I want to thank both of you for being on. Now I want to get to each one. First, Stephen, how does one get your book? It's on Backbeat Books. How does one get to buy your book?
It seems these days probably the best way would be to go to Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Some stores have it in stock, but it seems to have been sort of published on a limited run. That's what I'm finding. So it's sort of a sad thing. Can't get it into indie bookstores, but if someone wants to go online to order it, they certainly can.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that people have to know, it got sold out on the first printing, which I think is phenomenal. But to me, it's not really anything crazy because a Ramones, the importance of the book and what it is in the profile of the Ramones, I just knew it was going to sell, Monte, how does one get your book? Fabulous.
Again, Amazon.com worldwide, and any country you can get it worldwide.
I suggest that any fan of the Ramones should get both these books, On the Road with the Ramones, the bonus edition by Monte A. Melnick, and I Want You Around, Backbeat Books, author Stephen B. Armstrong. I strongly advise to get both these books. They're both amazing books, and in content, amazing info. And I want to thank both of you for being on. And Patrick, you're the wonderful co-host, producer of our show, and does a great job, of course. Very happy about this. And thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And Patrick, I love you, man. You're the best. Patrick.
Gabba, gabba, hey.
Gabba, gabba, hey.